Richard Dawkins, the most evangelical atheist and Darwinist on this planet.
Yes.
He writes in his book, A Devil's Chaplain, that our successors of the 21st century may get new data observations that would make them abandon Darwinism altogether or change it beyond recognition kind of thing. Yes.
What would you say? And if an empiricist comes in front of you and asks you to explain that, what does it mean?
We should have done science. We should be doing science. We should be doing philosophy.
Absolutely
We should be
agreed.
doing maths. And we left all these mass swathes of intellectuals of empathy. And somebody just overtook. We can't simply stand on the sides and say, oh, they were the bad guys.
That maybe in this particular century that the Muslim academics have accepted the Western superiority of...
You need to have that sense of bravery or that sense of, being able to challenge the current discourse, because really you're doing a favor to the academy anyway. Progress humanity intellectually anyway if you have that kind of mindset, because all of the progress that was made was done by unreasonable people, if you think about it.
Probably the most important for our youth.
Yes.
People who get so easily impressed by the exterior of the West and, the sense of glamour and so forth. Because
But I have to admit, just to interject, I love the way you come across, man. You make me sound like a Neanderthal. He's polite and stoic and this, and I'm like Greek. I'm like more Punjabi than him. What are you doing in Lahore, bro? We need to question our vision in our lives. If it was to be a great academic and to be seen as a leader on this issue and to be, have your back, you tap yourself on the back and other people give you a round of applause, and within the academic circles you're seen as somebody. If that's all you want to achieve, then with all due respect, you have a form of ujub, vanity, and maybe kibr, arrogance, and even riya, ostentation. In the Hadith Qudsi, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I am as my servant thinks that I am. In the Arabic, it also means I am as my servant expects me to be. And you'll find Allah in the greatest of your expectations.
he quoted the population crisis in the West. Only two things have been responsible to cause this level of population crisis. That is liberalism and Black Plague.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Dr. Umar Farooq Said, your host for today for the special session we are going to have. And I have two very special guests with me. First of all, our very own Mr. Kaisar Ahmed Raja. He is a well-renowned influencer and also a researcher. He needs no introduction, so I will not waste any time in introductions. Also, the second guest we have for today, he is a Greek but looks like a Pakistani. And we know him very well. And he is none other than Brother Hamza Entuzorzis, soon to be Dr. Hamza Entuzorzis, inshallah. And if you would mind, it's my academic curiosity which is compelling me to ask you, what is the progress on your thesis, by the way?
It's good. It's almost done, I guess. I mean, all the research has been done because I had a hack. So when I did my postgraduate certificate in philosophy, then I did my MA in philosophy, then I did the MRes, which is kind of seen slightly higher than an MA. It's more research-based. And my PhD is based on the MRes, but it's an expanded version.
Okay.
So I've done about 4 or 5 chapters already, 6 chapters maybe, and there's about 2 chapters left, which have already been done in terms of the content, the research, so just putting it together.
All right. I know it's not ideally correct to ask, but I would like to ask the concept of your research project, because I read the topic and it sounded very interesting to me. And because I'm an academic myself, I know it's not correct to ask because of the defense, but if you would like to just give the concept of your project, the research.
Yeah, so the concept of the PhD thesis is a philosophical or a theophilosophical, so a theological and philosophical and hermeneutical assessment of Ijaz al-Ilmi and the multiplicity of readings approach. So basically, what is Ijaz al-Ilmi? Ijaz al-Ilmi is the scientific miracles in the Quran, and I am deconstructing it from a philosophical, hermeneutical, and theological perspective, and then I'm providing an alternative, what I would consider more robust, classical methodology on how to understand natural phenomena, science, and the Quranic discourse. And the conclusion is that the Quran is a multi-layered text and a multi-level text, that it has an amazing timeless ability to be able to address different people, across different epochs and different ideas and understandings of the natural world across different eras in a way that allows them to conclude what the Quran wants them to conclude. And its structure is quite phenomenal. So if you look at ayat in the Quran referring to natural phenomena, if you go throughout the whole of the Quran, you see that the Quran gives you what I call an epistemic goal. Allah already tells you what you need to conclude.
That's correct.
For example, in Surah Mu'minun, chapter 23, verse 16 onwards or 14 onwards, Allah talks about the development of the human being. And then Allah says that basically He's the most perfect creator. You're going to die and then you're going to be resurrected. That's what Allah wants you to conclude. So Allah is giving you the conclusion. He's giving you the ayat to refer to the referent, the natural phenomena, in an ambiguous way, because it's structured ambiguously. And the ulama say ambiguity in the Quran has a particular epistemic function, meaning it's there to get you to think.
That's correct.
Because if it was too specific, you don't need to think about it, right?
That's correct.
So it's ambiguous enough for you to reflect. And Allah tells you to be in 5 cognitive and spiritual states when you do the reflection. The sa'ilin, those who ask questions, those who use their minds, ta'qilun, the albab, those who have insight, yatafakkarun, yatadabbarun, ponder, reflection, etc. And when you have those cognitive spiritual states and you refer to these ayat and the ambiguity pushes you to think further, Allah is already giving you the conclusion. So Allah is teaching you how to think in a Quranic way.
That's correct.
And it's like algebra. It's like a Quranic algebra. It's like 1 plus X is 2. What is X? It's 1.
That's correct.
So Allah is forcing you to think in a particular way because He's already giving you the conclusion. And the way Allah does that is in a very timeless way, multi-layered way. Even if you have an inaccurate understanding of the empirical world, you still conclude what Allah wants to conclude. It's absolutely phenomenal. This
Correct.
miracle transcends anything.
That's correct.
I mean, I wouldn't say miracle in a kind of, you know, a staff turning into a snake kind of thing. I would say it's extremely remarkable, and there is no naturalistic explanation to explain just the structure. Because if it was just from a 7th century person, even if it was poetic, even if it's like a form of rhyme prose, it's still very unlikely to be structured in a particular way that could make sense to people across eras, epochs, and yet still conclude what Allah wants you to conclude.
That's correct.
I mean, that's unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's coming out.
And
Inshallah.
you mentioned about staff turning into snake. That gives me something to ask you.
Yes.
What would you say? And if an empiricist comes in front of you and asks you to explain that, what does it mean? How would you explain him or justify this particular thing to him?
Well, I wouldn't, because an empiricist already has the wrong lenses on.
All right.
I would just challenge his lenses.
Okay.
Because generally speaking, especially the popular empiricists or the ignorant atheists, I like to say, they would basically say, oh, all knowledge is derived from experience, direct experience. Like, okay, well, there's so many truths that you believe to be true that cannot be justified by your own worldview. So we'll have to challenge that. But the thing about empiricism, or the thing about science, let's say, we live in an amazing time to be believers. Wallahi, I really believe that. We live in the most amazing time to be believers, because science is almost indistinguishable from magic now. Let's be honest.
That's correct.
Let's be honest. And
That's correct.
actually, I think he was the father of rocket fuel. He made a similar statement. He said there's going to come a time where science and magic are going to be indistinguishable. And people believe in this stuff, which is fine. I'm not saying they shouldn't. But if you believe in the stuff, then it's easier to believe in the unseen. Because think about it. Science today wants you to believe in contradictions. Quantum mechanics, quantum physics. That you could exist and not exist at the same time.
Correct.
What's harder to believe in, the unseen or a contradiction? Let's be honest. Let's be honest.
That's correct.
And the unseen is actually rational, because 100 years ago, people couldn't access certain things which now we can see due to technology. So it's not irrational to say that there is an unseen that we at this present time cannot access. That's not an irrational statement. But what they want you to believe in, and what some of these empiricists want you to believe in, is literally contradictions. So what's harder to believe in, a contradiction or the unseen? So it's so easy to be a believer now if you understand the scientific paradigm.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That is. That's right. It
That-
makes
that-
sense. To
yeah.
me, to me, it does. To me, it does. As a person of science, I can also affirm that. It makes very, the unseen, or I am not equating those two things, of course, the unseen or the contradiction. But if someone would ask me, of course, I will go and believe in the unseen rather than believing some contradiction.
Yeah,
of course.
but we also believe in the unseen, not because it's blind faith, it's because it's affirmed by the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we can also use evidence, reasoning, arguments outside of the scientific paradigm that could prove that the Quran is from Allah. So we have a justified epistemic root, which is testimony, valid testimony from the divine, which we can prove is from the divine. But I'm just saying conceptually, just irrespective of our justification for the Quran, just conceptually, what would you rather believe in, a contradiction or the unseen? And just based on an empiricist understanding, when you look at the history of empiricism, there were things that we didn't see 100 years ago, now we can see them. So it's not an irrational point. But what's irrational is, they want us to believe in contradictions.
That's great, absolutely. And coming to our second guest, Mr. Kaisar, I know about your research project, but I would like you to explain to our audience what is coming next from you. What research projects are you working right now?
Well, there are a few going on. I am contemplating doing my own PhD as well.
All right.
I mean, I've done all the basics, and I've even selected the university as well now that I'm going for. My idea is to challenge, it is philosophy of science, but with a particular focus on Darwinian evolution.
Okay.
I hold the view that it is an ontological view, and the best form of evidence for evolution you will find if you believe evolution to be true to start with. So it's not the other way around, that you find the evidence and then you conclude that it's true. It's that you have to believe it is true, and then you find the evidence, then you fit the new evidence within whatever you already believe to be true. And there's a lot of academic space available to criticize that. So plenty of examples we can use. How materialism or scientific reductionism is used, and the sort of rules created, the rules such as the methodological naturalism and so forth. I mean, it's a heavily man-made philosophical apparatus that runs the idea of evolution. And academically speaking, we can put a very robust case against it. And that is what I plan to do.
Would you distinguish between biological evolution and Darwinian evolution, or would you consider them all the same?
Well, evolution itself as a concept is a very, very old concept. I mean, we don't, the people say that, there was a Mohammedan theory of evolution. True, this is what it used to be called. But even before that, we had the Greek ideas of chemical evolution and how the body parts emerged from the earth, and then they developed mutual love and they started to come together and the body formed and all that. So, I mean, the concept is there long ago, and there is also a number of other explanations as well. Lamarckian, for example. So when we say Darwinian evolution, we mean that a particular version of evolution, a particular explanation of it. And the reason I'm more focused on that is because that forms the basis of our textbook biology. I think we can have a better criticism on Lamarckian, better criticism on the third way, but because they are more of a fringe ideologies, Darwinism or neo-Darwinism with the modern synthesis in particular, I mean, that is the mainstream. So because most of the evolutionary ideas come from our textbooks, and that is underpinned by neo-Darwinism, therefore my focus is on that. So when we say whether it's evolution and Darwinism, in fact, one of the scholars in the UK, I think Dr. Shoaib Malik.
Shoaib Malik is a friend. Yes,
is a friend.
Yeah, a friend.
I disagree with the eminent doctor.
I know many people does. I know.
And again, that disagreement is on the basis that we hold Darwinian evolution to be an absolute standard of truth, and then we see whether we can do integration or we can be quiet on this and that. And I said, no, you don't have to question your religious beliefs if somebody tells you that 10 plus 10 is 30. You have to confirm if that is the case mathematically. So I would want to challenge evolution on the scientific principles as opposed to the religious principles. If it doesn't hold merit scientifically speaking, then you don't need to go beyond that. It just collapses then and there.
Right, great. And Brother Hamza, do you hold the same opinion? Would you differ on it, especially in terms of Darwinian evolution and biological evolution? I'm sure you would have something to say on it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I probably side towards our dear brother here, rather than the other view. I think the other view is, without sounding too controversial, is most likely probably based on a subconscious inferiority complex, I think. Because I find it in the academic space thinking, okay, why did you find it necessary to do this? Because we don't ask those psychological questions. Like I had a discussion in South Africa with a Maulana, very intelligent Maulana, and he was kind of alluding towards the idea of Adamic exceptionalism.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
and I was like, okay, but why did you even find it necessary? Why do you think the person who wrote that paper, why do you think it's even necessary to start to squeeze Islam within the scientific paradigm in this way? There must be some kind of non-negotiable explicit or implicit assumptions that you're holding that you're not revealing to the audience.
That's correct.
Be a little bit more modest.
Yeah,
that's my problem. And so my view is somewhat similar. And I would basically say, well, when you study the philosophy of science, and if there is a friction between a well-confirmed scientific theory of predictive power, and it's the best that we have, with the Quranic discourse, so what? Like literally.
Yeah, so what?
And
that's right.
And like if you lived 200 years ago, there was a friction with the scientific consensus about the beginning of the universe, right?
That's right.
Steady state theory. What are you going to do? Accept the discourse because it's part of your social space and academic space? No. Yani, let's be true here. Let's not be a victim of the academic social influence here. What I would say is, Yani, be honest with what your assumptions are. I'm not saying Dr. Man, I love the brother, yeah? He's a phenomenal,
that's correct,
amazing,
very hard
and
working.
we work with him and stuff like that. But I'm just saying in general.
That's right.
So I would say if there is any friction and you cannot reconcile, not that there is a need to reconcile, but if there's any friction, you just do an epistemic weighing. You just say, well, the Quran is from Allah. He has the picture, we got the pixel. Science, when you study the philosophy of science, study the epistemic state of scientific theories, study the inference to the best explanation, study, just because something works, it doesn't mean it's true. And all of these things will tell you that it can change in the future. And it's not what it's dhanni, right? So it's speculative from an epistemic perspective in Islamic tradition. Even from the philosophical Western tradition, it's not deductive. Now they may argue, but it's to a certain probability that to deny it would be equivalent of denying a hadith and this, that, and the other. No, I'm sorry, that's not true. Because when you look at confirmation theory and they do probabilistic analysis, they apply Bayesian theory or others, there's so much ikhtilaf amongst the philosophy of science, they can't attribute a particular probability value to a particular theory to say that it's such a probability that's impossible it's going to change, or it's something that we should hold to be, very true. So they have these gray areas. So what I would say is, when you study the philosophy of science, there's no need. You could accept Darwinism practically, but you don't need to accept it into your aqidah. Say, fine, things work. Given the fact that they work, it doesn't necessarily follow that they're true. And we know that in the history of science, workable theories produce truths that we found out later that these workable theories were actually false. Professor Elliot Sober says that false theories can work better sometimes than true ones, right? And he's an atheist philosopher. So from that perspective, we could use it because it's a workable model, if you like, or an explanatory inference that allows us to produce certain practical things like antibiotics, saving lives, and so on and so forth. If it conflicts with the Quran, I don't have to take it into my aqidah. The only reason people have a problem is because they equate scientific conclusions and theories epistemically with the Quran. They commit an epistemological disqualification. That's what they're doing. They're committing an epistemological disqualification, that the Book of Allah is the same epistemic value as scientific theories.
It has to be confirmed in a sense.
But when you look at the philosophy of science, that's not true. Let's end it with this. Richard Dawkins, the most evangelical atheist and Darwinist on this planet.
Yes.
He writes in his book, A Devil's Chaplain, that our successors of the 21st century may get new data observations that would make them abandon Darwinism altogether or change it beyond recognition, kind of thing. So, but we take it as if it's like wahi.
Exactly.
Like
and it's not that it's we are making sort of an educated assumption that it may happen in future, because anyone can challenge that by saying that, okay, when that happened, then we will see. The point we're making is that this has been happening in the past. The example you gave earlier, for example, yesterday you gave the example of
phlogiston.
Now, if don't go that far back in past, and we say that, in fact, a few days ago I was having this conversation with an atheist, and he was saying that, well, what about all the disparities between science and Quran? I said, sure, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, because when you, as a human being, you are doing an interpretation of anything, it will have a degree of variance because you are looking at that thing from your own worldview. And no two worldviews are identical. So yes, you are going to have some disparities. If I may add one more sentence to it, just to qualify it.
Absolutely.
Isn't this amazing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that do justice, because that is closer to piety, taqwa. In Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not say do justice because that is taqwa. No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that justice is an objective concept. Taqwa is objective. But because you have to do justice and your worldviews are not same, so we are not saying that when you as a human being, when you do the interpretation of justice, you will get it absolutely right. So therefore it is closer to taqwa, but that is not taqwa itself because of the difference in the interpretations. Right? Now, the atheist I was referring to, he was asking me about the disparities, and I asked him, imagine we go back in time, right? So 1905, 1910, so anytime before 1920s, and we are having the same conversation over a cup of tea, and you say that your Quran says universe is created, it's eternal. Because at that time, the scientific worldview was that it was eternal. It's only 1925, 1927 sort of time when the analysis of redshift and all that, it was realized that, oh, actually, 13.7 billion years ago, there we can see there is a point, and before that, there was singularity. And yeah, it did came into existence. Then the scientific worldview changed, but that would have been, the Quran, according to them, would have been wrong prior to that. Or if we come, if you jump further down in time and come to say, 1991, before that, almost every atheist was asking a question that why your Quran says talks about the functions of heart. You reflect and you do and you bring all these emotional stuff at the heart. It's just an organ that pumps the blood. That's what it does. It's only 1991 when 40,000 neurons discovered in the heart to actually help the main brain in processing of emotions. And by that, I don't mean processing the pains, the physical pains that the heart feels. I'm not talking about heart attack. I am talking about human emotions. So there is something discovered, and now we know that, oh, no, actually there is something else. So the point we're making is that if we hold a view that science is better in its own right because it is an ongoing endeavor, then what you are saying in the same sentence is that it is not conclusive. And if it isn't conclusive, it is based on the humanistic interpretation. As Khalid beautifully explains it, that there is a difference between scientist and scientistic. So mostly what we have is scientistic, right, according to the scientists. And that can change tomorrow, like brother said. Then why should I take that as a default position?
So many retreat papers every year, so many retreat papers that I see.
The field of knowledge he was referring to is neurocardiology, which is a growing field. So that's a fascinating example. But I mentioned earlier about the inference of the best explanation and also the epistemic status of scientific theory. So I just wanted to explain what those teach us if you study the philosophy of science, that you can have new background information and new data or observations that can contradict your current conclusions. That's essentially what we're saying. And given that's the nature of science, and scientists usually use inference to the best explanation, your best explanation can change if your background information changes and the data or observations change.
Absolutely.
So that is essentially what we're saying. So therefore, it is transient. It's the shifting sands of science. Now, look, don't get me wrong. There's something scientifically that are very unlikely going to change, like germ theory. Yeah, but those kind of ideas don't really give.
Science is a variable.
Yeah, but those are not. They don't give the Quran any friction. Those type of ideas, but the kind of theories or conclusions that give the Quran friction, if you want to use that term, are theories that are probabilistic, based on their own philosophical assumptions, and they have their own disputes. So from that perspective, he articulated it very well. Our brother articulated it very well.
Absolutely.
That it's not an issue. But for me, just in the academic space, I just want to find out why are you motivated to do stuff like this? And I think it's because there is a sense of intellectual cowardice, generally speaking, amongst the Muslim academics. No, I'm going to be honest.
Yeah,
like Dr.
Shabir,
look, don't be polite, bro. Just be honest.
All
It's
right,
better.
all right.
At least you're honest to yourself, which is the greatest thing. So at the end of the day, Dr. Shabir Akhtar, he passed away about a month ago. May Allah grant him Jannah. He was a great academic philosopher, one of the very few rare gems that we had in our modern Islamic history, because he wrote the book, The Quran and the Secular Mind, and very others. He knew Greek, he knew Arabic. He was just a polymath. And if you read some of his works, it's just absolutely fascinating. And he talks about, for example, the issue between Quran and science. He talks about politics. He talks about humanism, atheism. Actually, his book, The Quran and the Secular Mind, is littered with Quranic references. And he basically wanted to go through the whole of the Quran and stop when an atheist or a secularist or a humanist would basically, I don't really agree with that, and basically provide a theo-philosophical response from the Islamic tradition. It's a phenomenal book. And he was one of the first people before social media, and many of us in the social media world, we become algorithm prostitutes, yeah? We prostitute ourselves to the algorithm, but he wasn't in that era, and he fought quite hard intellectually against the Salman Rushdie affair, the defaming of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He wrote the book, Be Careful with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Anyway, and the reason I'm mentioning that is because he worked hard to show that he was an academic intellectual, but he was not a coward. And he said to me once, what's the point of being an intellectual if you're going to be a coward? And this is very important because I think a lot of it comes from that cowardice, not a cowardice in a sense of, there's something inherently wrong with you, is because you just submitted yourself to the academy. And sometimes we think the academy is like this objective, Moses tablets that comes down, but the academy has its own metaphysical and epistemological assumptions, and especially different manifestations of the academy, depending where you go, liberal arts or whatever the case may be. They would have, for example, a postmodern assumption, or they will have, for example, a radical skeptical assumption, or others would have an empirical assumption, which can be challenged. And the curriculum is based sometimes on those particular assumptions, with some caveats here and there to make them sound objective. But at the end of the day, you're a victim of the academy.
That's right.
So we need to understand that and be able to challenge those assumptions. That's why the discourse on the Darwinism and science issue, I find it so, it's as if they can't see it. The best approach is, I think, the epistemic weighing approach, or the approach that the brother just mentioned. And it's an approach I think gives more confidence, and it shows that we have our own worldview with our own theo-philosophical assumptions that we can ground in reason, and we could challenge your assumptions.
Exactly.
But what happens now is they enter into the particular academic space with assumptions that don't really align with Islam, and they're trying to do reconciliation. It's like, sorry.
That is the problem.
That's right.
And on the other side, the opposing camp, I'm sorry, I'm sure you have your questions.
Yes,
we are just trying to improve each other's position.
That's right.
I'm so sorry about that.
No problem.
One of the interviews, Richard Dawkins and Brian Greene, I mean, if you want to understand how their mind works, that probably is the best interview you can go through. Where Brian Greene says that, look, we are clear there is no God. That is what it is not. This is what he meant. It's not. This isn't a verbatim. But look, we believe there is no God. We believe that everything is naturalistically explainable and so forth. But what if there is God? Then what? And Richard Dawkins goes that I am not at ease with that notion, because if such a God exists in a way that would undermine the scientific enterprise, then I am not okay with it. Here is the problem with the statement. And this is pure philosophically examined. We're trying to examine it philosophically. That if God exists, then it would be absolutely the case that God exists. And Richard Dawkins is prepared to deny that absolute truth because of whatever he calls his scientific enterprise. This is how far-rooted they are, or they're grounded in their ignorance and in their worldview. I just don't understand, why do we have to assume such a worldview? And in the process of doing that, betray our own and say that, oh, you are right, that if God exists, for example, then we will not believe in that God. But let me see if I go through some of the pages of Quran and see if I can do a tadbiq, the reconciliation of it. And I think that's simply not right. You can get it wrong, that's fair enough, but at least you've got to be honest with your views. And this is
But would you also agree to some extent that modernity have to have affected the Muslim society? Also, in coming from the West, also in the East as well. I'm seeing that because I'm noticing each and every passing year that they sometimes, the academics, they want to feel included amongst that particular Western discourses, which you also talking about. You feel modernity or has affected Islamic societies in a way, intellectually and socially as well?
surely, absolutely. I mean, this is a very long, ongoing social experiment on people, and it started within the West. And then it went out. I mean, because what Western people did, and I think we have to give them a lot of credit, they were absolutely brilliant in this idea of creating the alive influencers and heroes in the society. Because at the moment, for example, in our Islamic world, if we say, well, let's make a list of 100 intellectuals, we have to go 1,000 years back, 800 years back, 500 years back. And West had the same problem. So what they did, they created the influencers who were alive, the people you could go and meet and attend their classes. So there is Bohr, there is Einstein, there is even the people who were disowned by them, people like Galileo and so forth. Even they were sort of brought back to life, not physically, but their works were being promoted and so forth. So people could connect with them directly. And when they saw those people talking about all the natural explanations and God is not needed and so on and so forth, and I think they made a strategic mistake, when they assumed the landscape of naturalism, even though many of them were believers, but because they did not take the ownership of the religion, that message cascaded to their societies, which ultimately was interpreted that we don't need God anymore.
That's right.
And then same thing was then expanded worldwide through modernity, because mind you, the colonial setup is the product of modernity, right? And isn't this amazing that in past 200 years ago, all the intellectuals, all the thinkers, all the influencers happened to have born in the West? No intelligent person was born in Brazil.
Good question.
Right? In Africa somewhere. It's amazing, isn't it? And the people who are our influencers are the ones who actually are quoted with them, with some exceptions like Nelson Mandela and a couple of other people. But generally speaking, they created this sort of intellectual imperialism, which was then exported to the rest of the world. And this is what is happening in our world. Because on one side, you look at great scientific advancements. You see great, the dazzling exterior of science, the technology itself, and that is being produced by the people of the West. So people will always go to the dominating people. In this case, that happened with the West. I would want to make one brief, but I think very important statement, that our solution does not lie in just a critique of what the West has done. We have to accept that we left our ground empty. We should have done science. We should be doing science. We should be doing philosophy. We should be doing maths. And we left all these mass swathes of intellectuals of empty. Somebody just overtook. We can't simply stand on the sides and say, oh, they were the bad guys. No.
Yeah, but this is a political issue rather than anything else, to be honest. Because, look, sometimes we have a myopic understanding of history. Like we're in this blip in Islamic civilization and we're like, oh, we're backward. There's no scientists. There's no thinkers. But look at it a little bit. Be a little bit more broad or holistic, or look beyond the horizon.
Okay.
95% of our history, we've always been on top, the Islamic civilization.
That's right. That's right.
It's only this 5%, right? Generally speaking. And the sciences were found in Islam. History, philosophy, poetry, astronomy, all of these things were found in the Islamic world. That's where we had the likes of, Islamic Spain, that was called Paradise on Earth by academics. It's a convivencia, coexistence, where Muslims, Jews, and Christians could look into the interconnecting principles of nature. You had the second Moses of the Jewish tradition emerging from Islamic Spain, writing in Arabic. Maimonides, Musa bin Maymun, and he was the physician of Salahuddin Ayyubi, right? And, when the Christians overtook, Spain, and they found all of these works. This propelled Europe into the Renaissance. Actually, Professor Thomas Arnold says that in his book, A Preaching of Islam, that Muslim Spain was that milestone to propel Europe into essentially now it being civilized.
How it looks like,
yeah.
Of course.
And also we have to realize that we had a civilization that created a social, political, and an academic environment whereby you have the likes of Ibn al-Haytham, who wrote the book on optics, I think in the 10th century. And in his autobiographical accounts, he says, I wanted to find out how God's will works in the real world, practicing Muslim with the beard. And he's been cited by the historians of science that he is one of the key milestones in the development of the systematic scientific method. Lots of the things, these Islamophobes or these so-called Muslim atheists, if you want to call them that, when they use the phones and the computers to attack Islam, they're using something that is based on the algorithm. Where did the algorithm come from? It came from the Islamic civilization as a result of social political principles that facilitated people to be able to develop these things. It's a very self-defeating strategy that they use sometimes. So we also have to include the political element, because for whatever reason, I'm not an analyst on this issue, but when you have a worldview that is supported by state infrastructure, it's supported by, political power, you're going to promote your worldview and you're going to implement your social political values in order to facilitate your worldview and also facilitate some of the timeless values that you hold, like coexistence, progress, all of these things, which were part of the Islamic tradition. So this is not because of there's something wrong with Islam itself, but we lost, and spiritually you could say it's because something happened within us that we deserved this kind of reminder from Allah. Because what does Allah say in the Quran? Inna Allah la yughayyiru. Indeed, Allah will not change the situation of a people until they change what's within themselves. The tafsir, the exegesis here is, Allah will not change a state from a good state to a bad state unless something happened within you. So there is that kind of, I agree, that kind of there's something happened within us. But the gift that we could get again, which is a form of political authority and power to allow these things to revive themselves, is going to happen as a result when we fix something within as well, for sure. But I just wanted to mention the political aspect because that's important, because the reason the West now is dominant scientifically and so on and so forth, it's only been, 100, 200, 300 years. They don't have a great CV. We have a fantastic CV. It's over 1,000 years old. And I would even argue 80% of this CV is full of bloodshed anyway, yeah? Because under atheistic, Western, secular ideologies, you had more blood being spilled than any time in human history. So, they should just turn down the arrogance knob a bit, yeah, when it comes to these issues. But yeah, so I just want to mention that political discourse and power here is something that we should consider.
But would you agree on this fact that by listening to you, I have understood that maybe in this particular century that the Muslim academics have accepted the Western superiority of...
some of them have.
Some of them.
But I don't blame them from a sociological, psychological point of view.
At least they become apologetics.
Well, look,
apologetics.
I wouldn't blame them from a sociological, psychological point of view, because if you have a need to belong and a need to feel certain, which are key aspects of the development of the social norm and social conformity, then you're going to go to the dominant ideological frame. It's simple as that. And that's what happens. It's the nature of the beast, the sociological beast. That's what happens. If I want to belong as an academic, yeah,
that's right,
and I can't get that belonging from my subgroup, which is the Muslim community, because we're in a bit of a mess, I'm going to attach myself to the dominant group, even if I don't believe in them or believe in some of their assumptions. Also, if I don't feel certain about something and I can't find it within my subgroup, the Muslim community, I'm going to go to the dominant group by virtue of them being dominant. That is well known in social conformity. So what we have to do, if you're going to get involved in this space, that's why you can't be an intellectual coward. You have to be a leader. You have no choice. Because otherwise you're going to be consumed by the kind of philosophical assumptions that exist within the academy. Now, I'm not saying all of the assumptions are wrong. I'm not saying there's some overlaps. I'm not saying you throw the baby out with the bathwater. But you see this within some very popular speakers. They've become academic, and then now they adopt empiricist assumptions which don't belong in our tradition, and they think it's Islam, and now they develop a new theory like I've invented something new. No, you're just a sheep, you're intellectual sheep, you've couched intellectual language, and you think you're smart. You're just a slave to the academy. And the funny thing is, you need to have that sense of bravery or that sense of, being able to challenge the current discourse, because really you're doing a favor to the academy anyway. Because you're just going to progress, you're going to progress humanity intellectually anyway if you have that kind of mindset. Because all of the progress that was made was done by unreasonable people, if you think about it. You think about it. Like if you want peace and you want to keep the status quo, then just be reasonable. But you have to have this sense of intellectual unreasonableness, which requires a sense of bravery in order for you to basically have progress. So this attitude will be doing the academy a favor.
And this is so true. Recently, I've been asked a question regarding the label given, the rebellious views.
Oh, is that what you call it?
Yeah.
So that's a badge of honor, bro.
It is.
Yeah, he sure is called that.
Yeah,
I've heard it.
And my answer was, and still is, that look, and by the way, the framing of the question was that if you read Western philosophies, which I do, then why are you, such a critic of the Western civilization? I said, well, okay, why am I the rebel? But to start with, I'm not against the West. How can I be against a Tom who wakes up at 4 a.m. in the morning so that he can get to his workplace at 5 so that he can provide for his family? What possible disagreement can I have with him? Absolutely. Or a Stacey, for that matter? My problem is with the policymakers who've made certain policies that are creating a living hell for the people of the West, within the West, and a living hell for the people outside the West. They're not being fair with anyone. I'm against that. As for being the rebel, the whole point of going through philosophies is that you become a rebel. I don't like Nietzsche, but I respect him that he was a rebel to Christian sense of morality. I have profound disagreements, but I respect him in a way that he stood up against. And all the philosophers did the same thing. You will not find a prominent philosopher who said, yes, sir, or yes, madam, to status quo. That is why, because it enables you to develop deeper thoughts and question what is and what ought to be, and according to what it ought to be. So you find layers within your epistemology and you challenge everything along the journey, and then you are able to say that, no, I'm against the American terrorism. No, I am against the Iraq war. I am going to speak up against that. I am going to point out that more than 30% people who died in Afghanistan, civilian people, they were children. I am against. That's the whole point of going through philosophies. If you are going to be an intellectual slave, then what is the point? And that's what Brother Hamza was alluding to. Not even alluding to, he was very expressive actually. Then if you are going to be an academic leader, then at least what you have to do is challenge the status quo. If you can't do it and you just want to be what we call Hamnawa in Pakistan, so you have the main Qawwal, right? Look at the Qawwali going on, right? So you've got a main guy and the background chorus singers, and you're just doing this, you're just clapping and saying, yeah, that's it.
This is a very important thing to discuss. It is very important. And another thing that's important to me, especially in academia, and I spoke to a very close friend of mine, someone who I see as a teacher, and he's academic, but he's very active and he wants to make an impact. Many of our guys don't really want to make an impact. They're so concerned with the new book that only 3 people in the world are going to read, and that 3 people in the world are going to understand, and 1 person is really going to take seriously. What is the point of you being in academia? We need to question our vision in our lives. If it was to be a great academic and to be seen as a leader on this issue, and to be, have your back, you tap yourself on the back and other people give you a round of applause, and within the academic circles you're seen as somebody. If that's all you want to achieve, then with all due respect, you have a form of ujub, vanity, and maybe kibr, arrogance, and even riya, ostentation. Or you're just dumb. Because if you really are concerned about Islam, you're concerned about Allah being pleased with you, you're concerned about the progress of the ummah, you want Allah's word to be the highest, which is the kind of, if you glorify Allah, you believe He's the only one worthy of worship, that's exactly what you want. You want Allah's word to be the highest. If you don't have that inside you, then obviously you're going to end up like this. But if you do have that inside you, then you're going to have a bigger vision for yourself. Yes, I want to get into academia to make an impact, to actually people to, and there's many Muslim academics. Some of them do the most obscure PhDs, like, you know, there's a village in the south of France that has extremist tendencies, and it's connected to the fact that they eat porridge in the morning. I know that sounds really funny, but something like that. And I'm like, whoa, like, end? And what? Why? Yeah, please. Obviously, PhDs give you research skills that transferable, because in Western academia, you don't really have subject matter experts anymore in PhD fields. You do a PhD because it teaches you how to do good research, and therefore you're able to do any type of research once you finish. So I get that. But still, even them doing that particular topic and what they do after the PhD, they just become a careerist. Like it's just about a career, and it's about your ego. What impact are you making to the community? And that's why there are some Christian academics. I respect them. Take William Lane Craig, for example. 2 PhDs, one in philosophy, one in theology. He's done his academic stuff. I'm not saying I agree with him completely, and he was an initial motivation for me, like maybe over a decade ago. And you know, but the point here is he created a intellectual activism in his community. He had a website. He wrote stuff for the layman, for the bridge between the layman and the academic world. He wrote stuff for the academic world. He was very active on campuses. He created, you know, intellectual discussion groups all over the world, or all over the US, and so on and so forth. You know, I think they're called Reasonable Faith Chapters or something. Yeah, I don't really remember. I haven't followed him for a while. But the point here is, that is what Muslim academics should be doing to make an impact. Not to go to the ivory tower and, like, you know, I'm just doing some, you know, it's just all ego. And I'm not saying they're all like that. But if you look at how many academics we do have right now, and a lot of them just, you know, they like to stay on the sidelines, do their work, get the tap on the back. But you have to get your hands dirty.
Maybe they lack vision, I guess. So,
that's my point. You need to have an Allah-centric, Akhirah-centric vision. Where do you see yourself in the Akhirah? Hopefully the highest form. Is it pleasing to Allah? Therefore, is it Allah-centric? And you have to have a lofty goal. If you don't have that, then you need to question your psychological and spiritual state. I know this is quite harsh for people
to... But also coming to one point that you mentioned the spiritual progress. But would you consider the material progress is also important along with the spiritual progress in order to be at that level which we want to be, or the Muslim academics want to be? Also, one thing also came when Brother Kaisar was talking, that how these people who are considered as the rebellions are treated, especially in the West, coming not only the Occidentalist, also one example came into my mind, Dr. Gunter Bechley, how he was treated. You know, they completely get them out of the equation, they, you know, remove them from everywhere, how they are treated like. So there are some fears, I guess so.
It is, because it's an academic mafia.
Yeah, that does happen. So would you consider that it can be because we are not in control materially? We are lagging a little behind. So would you consider that it is important for us to come in that driving seat? It is also important to progress materially along with spiritual.
As the Muslim community?
Yes, as a Muslim community.
I mean, but the whole distinction between spiritual and material is a false distinction anyway. I hear this in Pakistan a lot, actually. Deen and dunya. Yeah?
That's right.
There's a realm that's deen, and there's a realm that's dunya. So it's like almost the Christian, render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's and render unto God's what is God's. It's the most ridiculous framing. You've been infected with a secular worldview. There is no deen over dunya, dunya over deen. Let me get part of the deen, let me get part of the dunya. I know what they mean, but it's a wrong framing. It's all deen. Because that's your worldview. If it's not your worldview, then you'll make those distinctions between deen and dunya. So if it's your worldview, it's the lenses that you put on your eyes in order to understand yourself and reality, then it would shape how you want to view the dunya. And Allah says, take your portion of the dunya. Allah talks about for us trying to get authority and have material progress and all of these things. These are important things. They're implied as well. You may not find them explicitly in the Quran and Sunnah in many cases, but they're implied by virtue of us, you know, wanting to take care of the affairs of ourselves and humanity, that we're the best example to mankind, and so on and so forth. So the point is, if you have the Islamic worldview, then there is no distinction between spiritual and material. Your worldview would facilitate the best affairs in the dunya and the akhirah. Because what does Allah say about the greatest success? The greatest success is preventing yourself from going into the nar, being protected from the nar of the fire, and entering Jannah. That's the greatest triumph, Allah says. And also having the best life, individually, socially, and that would imply politically as well. How do you get the best life? By focusing on the dunya? No, by obeying Allah. So it's a deeni matter, right? So so that distinction is a false distinction.
And if I can just steal a moment there, my father, where he explained that to me decades ago, not giving away my age, that living, when we live, and of course, because we live in a material world, so we have to have a material life, sure. But the distinction between deen and dunya is a false hypothesis, because living is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you live. And how do you live? That is the instructional manual that comes in the form of Sharia. So you cannot say that I have got a mobile phone or a TV and it came with a set of instructions that this is how you use it. And sometimes I will use it. For the rest of the time, I will not. But you're going to make a mess of that device because you're not following the actual instruction manual. So the relationship between what we call deen and dunya is exactly that. So we live in dunya, we have to live, have to get married, have children, get job, do businesses, develop technology, sure. But the permeating spirit in everything is that instructional manual, is that Sharia. So they can't be two different things. That cannot be our worldview. But what we were saying regarding people that you said, the people who get pressurized and all that, I think is a very important point we have to mention there, that if they are part of an academic sphere in which there are certain rules that are promoted and certain worldviews are promoted, and you mentioned Dr. Gunter Beckley and Richard Sternberg, a number of other people are the victims of it. So yes, there is a scientific mafia there, true. But what should a Muslim do? Be part of it or rebel? If you cannot rebel, and by the way, our thought leaders, they don't really have to come up with some brand new, beautiful ideas and say whether community will support us or not and all that. I mean, these sort of genuine fears being produced. Let me give you an example where community has, when they held their position and because of their steadfastness, something changed. And our academics, they can learn a lot from that. I am referring to this growing resistance against LGBT and the transgenderism and all that in the West. The entire Western Christian population was engulfed in that and they were just driven away. Muslim community, they said no. What happened? 20 years ago, after 9/11, the most maligned community all of a sudden is found in the driving seat. Abrahamic brethren, let's do it together. Brother, together? Yes, brother, together. There's a Crusader Christian, there is a Muslim fighter, and they made these memes and all that. Why? Because the community said no to something which is evil, and that gave them the respect. This is a cue that can be taken by our academics and thought leaders, that when you say no to something, you will get respect. You don't get respect by dancing on someone's tune because they are already doing a better dance than you. So even if you come up with the best arguments in favor of evolution and best arguments in favor of materialism and empiricism and all that, it will still be like, that guy is like Richard Dawkins. And to me, that is an insult. I would rather be like Yasser Ahmad Raja than Richard Dawkins.
That's right.
And it's important because even amongst Christian academics in the field of the philosophy of the mind, consciousness, I remember reading an academic book and it mentioned that you still can't talk about God even at the dinner table amongst academics in the philosophy of the mind. They'll just snigger at you. And this is not even the academic platform, it's dinner, right?
That's right.
And what's interesting that with a lot of these things, you start to find actually God replacements. Like, one would argue in the philosophy of the mind, some forms of panpsychism are God's replacements. Yeah, like, even electrons have a form of proto-consciousness.
Sounds interesting as well.
Then you have multiverse theory. That's a God replacement to a degree. Infinite has the power to produce one universe that can facilitate complex conscious life. Obviously, there's more we can unpack there, but I'm just throwing these out there just for you to see that a lot of these things are actually God replacements. Richard Dawkins, when he was asked about the first living cell, because we can't really solve that problem. Oh, it came from an alien. It's called panspermia. Yeah, it's a really nice word, right? Basically, an alien put the first living cell on a meteorite and it came on Earth. Like, a lot of these things are literally God replacements, and you see that. Because remember, secularism is designed to promote itself and protect itself. And it would use the arms of the state, the structure of the state in order to do that. If people think that's not true, then with all due respect, you are extremely naive. And you have that in the university space, and you'll have that in other structures, powerful structures within a secular society. And that's just the nature of the game. That's the nature of worldviews. They're designed to progress and promote themselves and protect themselves. And that's what they do, and they use the academic space for that. Yes, they may not be always explicit about it, but it's there. The trend is there. The ethos is there. And that's why you need that sense of intellectual bravery. And that, what does that come from? Bravery comes from literally your heart connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what is understanding that what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is you die, which in the academic space is very rare. Yeah? So that's the worst that can happen. And if that happens, where are you going? To Al-Wadud, to the most loving, to Ar-Rahman, the most merciful. Obviously, we're not going to say that we assume we're going to go straight to paradise, but we have husn adhan billah. We have a good opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the Hadith Qudsi, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I am as my servant thinks that I am. In the Arabic, it also means I am as my servant expects me to be. And you'll find Allah in the greatest of your expectations. So that's the worst that can happen. Khalas. No, realize what the implications of not being courageous is. We're always going to have fear, but you need to overcome that fear. What is the implications of not having that bravery and courage? And those implications are more painful than if you were to be courageous. Know what the implications are of being courageous. You fulfilled an Allah-centric goal, you're fulfilling your vision, you're going to Jannah, you're pleasing Allah, you're elevating the community, you're making Allah's word the highest, subhanAllah. And also, do things in your life that develop courage. Like whether it's like an active sport or, you put yourself in dangerous situations that evoke that sense of consciousness. I forgot what the process are called. The sympathetic and parasympathetic, right? You're the doctor, right?
Yeah, there's a sympathetic and parasympathetic.
Yeah, which is the one that actually doesn't make you flight, it makes you fight. Which one is that called?
That is a sympathetic.
Yeah, so you wanna basically work on the sympathetic aspect, yeah, of the nervous system. And that requires you just reacting to things, being in dangerous situations, whether it's bungee jumping or driving a fast car or doing martial arts, whatever the case may be. Also, read about the pious people of the past, stories of bravery, the Sahaba, the Prophet ﷺ, the most brave people. And also be around brave people. Because if you're with 4 brave people, you're likely to be the 5th. States of being give rise to states of being. So I didn't want to just complain, I want to give a solution on how to develop bravery. And also fundamentally, work on your spiritual heart. Because if you're closer to Allah, you have taqwa, you do dhikr, you do your salah, you do tadabbur of the Quran, you do tahajjud, that's going to create a stronger spiritual heart. So it's going to be less likely to waver because the qalb does taqallub, it wavers. It'd be less likely if you have a strong spiritual heart. You put all those things in place, you're likely to be brave.
Also, I would like to ask you a suggestion for especially the youth of this region, especially the Asians and the South Asians, especially in this context of my own country, Pakistan, that we are, and you would be aware of it, that we are struggling economically these days a little bit. But if a guy is very enthusiastic regarding dawah and he want to call for the good, and there is a person who is living, for example, in Scandinavia, as regions like those which are materialistically very stable, the person is economically very stable, and when he goes to do the dawah, what should he say that in return the person is not saying, you see your own condition, you're not doing very fine, do you want me to become like you? Or how would you answer that particular thing? Because at this moment, before coming here, many people do suggested me to ask for your opinion regarding this particular thing.
Yeah, but who's to say that they're successful? You have to define a success. Well, I would say to them, why do you think success is that you just have money?
That's right.
How is that a definition of success? Yani, you guys, I think a lot of them, 40%, I think, are on antidepressant tablets. Yeah, it's constructed happiness.
Maybe more than that.
It's constructed happiness. You guys don't know what a man and a woman is. You're still debating that. You are removing necessary social hierarchies that have served humanity well. You have excessive individualism in an atomistic society where you have euthanasia, you take your parents into glorified concentration camps because of the key assumption or philosophical assumption of liberalism, which is individualism, seeing the individual as an abstract entity devoid from social obligations and attachments. But with all due respect, who's successful? We don't have these problems in Pakistan.
Yes, right. That's right.
Come on, man. let's just lay it out on the table. And that's why these Pakistani Muslims, they shouldn't have a Gora complex. We need to surgically remove it from ourselves. Because just look at the situation. Yeah, fine, you have some buildings and you have some science. Khalas, we'll take that from you, we'll borrow it from you as well. Thank you very much. But in terms of what makes civilization civilized, it's how you treat each other. Fine, I'm not saying it's perfect in Pakistan, but people are generally speaking not that depressed compared to others. Like, I haven't seen one starving person in Pakistan. I've traveled throughout Pakistan because they still have those social values.
I can affirm that.
I know people are starving in the UK. There are soup kitchens, right? And we see people taking care of their parents. People have communitarian, complementarian values.
Absolutely.
We're not sending them to glorified concentration camps. We know what a man and a woman is. Thank you. We have social hierarchies that have served us well. Fine, maybe we abuse them, but we have mechanisms within the tradition to fix that.
Agreed.
And there's so much more. So, yes, you may have an aspect of success, but you're not successful. With all due respect, liberalism is a totally failed project when it comes to human beings and human values. You guys don't even trust each other. You don't know how to love each other. Like, literally, you don't know what love is. You think love is because of the hedonistic principle, because of even maybe ethical egoism or utilitarianism, whatever you want to choose within the liberal secular paradigm, and because of individualism, as Professor Charles Taylor says, it's the primary of the self. Primacy is on the nafs, on the self. You think love is actually allowing people to follow their desires. Come on, you want people to be animals. That's what you want to be, really. And Allah says you're not going to identify with your desires. Have you not seen the one who takes his own desires his Lord? Who is more astray than the one who just follows his whims and desires? We're not saying desires are bad, but some desires are good, some are blameworthy, depends on their intensity, but also some are neutral and it's how you express those desires. But we're saying we're not going to be a victim to them. We're not going to be enslaved to them. We're not going to basically submit to them. We submit to Allah. That's our identity. So Allah elevates us from the animal world to the angelic world from that perspective. Liberalism takes you away from the angelic world into the demonic world, into the animalistic world.
Animalistic world, yes.
Shahawat. It's all shahawat. It's all blameworthy desires. That's how they express their love. Do what you want. As long as it doesn't harm anyone, right? Do what you want. Just whatever you desire. That's why they don't have relations, they don't have to love. That's why you have some men in the West who are okay for their wives to have intercourse with another man just so she keeps going. This is well known in many Western relationships now, yeah? These people are dayuth. Do you know what a dayuth is? It's like someone has no protective jealousy over the women folk. These people are animals, with all due respect.
Yes, sir.
They're animals.
Agreed.
Like, how can you allow your wife to sit with another man and think it's going to be good for your relationship? Come on.
It's a shame, yeah.
What's going on here?
This part, Sheikh, is probably the most important for our youth.
Yes.
People who get so easily impressed by the exterior of the West and, the sense of glamour and so forth. Because
But I have to admit, just to interject, I love the way you come across, man. You make me sound like a Neanderthal. He's polite and stoic and this, and I'm like Greek. I'm like more Punjabi than him. What are you doing in Lahore, bro?
I can spot the
I'm more
difference.
Punjabi than
I
him.
can spot
I
that.
always say Greeks are the European versions of Punjabis.
okay.
Yeah.
All right,
But I just wanted to, it's a praise, by the way.
let's restart that.
Jazakallah.
You were absolutely right on this.
Man, I bless you.
Okay, look, the point we're making is that this is so important for our youth.
Is that the
to
royal
know.
we? Is that the royal we?
Look, that is you and us being the Hamnawaz, the chorus singers, right? Because our youth is the people who get impressed by the liberalism and materialism and atheism. They are so intellectually lazy that they think that, look, we should assume their values because they are better than us, and you, the Muslims, have not contributed in science and technology and the global processes and so forth. So In other words, I would be trying to impress other people by my knowledge, by quoting Hamza sources, that Hamza sources said that. Well, if I say Hamza sources said that, it means Hamza sources said that. It does not make me an intelligent person. So our youth does not, I mean, when they criticize Muslims and Islam and their values and all that, even whilst doing that, they have no contribution towards science or technology or any contribution in global processes, eradication of poverty, anything like that. They always point out that because West is doing that, therefore we are better than the Muslims of our country because we are telling them that the West has done that. What kind of stupidity is that? And when they hear something like what you just said, someone who is from the West to explain that, guys, this is a failed project. The experts of civilizational collapses, they've identified three things that is going to cause the collapse of Western civilization. Insurmountable debt. I mean, there is more money to be paid back than there is in the system, thanks to the fractional reserve banking that they've been giving away money that never existed to start with. Number two, sharp population decline. The fertility rate of 2.1 is nowhere to be seen not in a single European or the Western country.
Maybe in the Africans, maybe.
Oh, African nations. I mean, the global fertility rate has dropped. That's fair enough.
Right.
But there's a crisis there. And the third problem is the innovation deficit, which isn't a huge problem, but it is a problem because now the developments in science and technology, they are coming more often than not from Far East, Japan and Korea and so forth. There was a time when literally every new thing would come from the West. Well, that's not the case anymore. So these three things, but particularly the first two, and the guesstimation is that this is the last century, as from 2050 onwards, the cracks have already appeared, it will crumble and it will collapse. It will not completely go away, but it will lose its dominating power because you don't have solutions, right? I mean, for example, the Canadian solution at the moment to the population crisis is to have massive immigration, right? 1.5 million people in 3 years. And that is not a solution. It's a compensation. Right? It's not a lasting solution.
And the funny thing is, the reason for that type of collapse is because of individualism, which is the premise of liberalism. Liberalism basically eats itself away. That's what it's doing. It's self-destructive, just by the virtue of its own values.
Oh, it's a massive collective suicide. No one has ever seen. I mean, so much so that in The Death of the West, the author's name will come to me in a minute. I've quoted him so many times. He quoted experts and reported in the book that the population crises in the West, only two things have been responsible to cause this level of population crisis. That is liberalism and Black Plague. These are two. I mean, if you're equating,
well, liberalism is a disease, so
it is a disease, and he's equating the two diseases. You know, exactly.
It's an ideological disease.
It is an ideological disease,
and some of us are ideologically.
I mean, why would you take responsibility in the society?
Muhammad Hijab says.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
did you have the jab, the COVID jab?
No, of course not.
No, you had it.
Yeah, because I actually had corona, so
you
I
had to travel. Oh, okay, you had COVID.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I also do a lot of traveling, so it was a requirement at the time. So
yeah, that was a requirement. This is the reason why I also had it. You didn't have any, problems traveling while you didn't have the COVID jab.
No.
How is it so?
I'm not going to tell you.
You got a trick. You got certainly got a trick.
Punjabi Greek, so it's a lot of warriors.
No, I mean, look, I'm not obviously anti-medicine or anything like that. It was just, for me, it was just an intuitive, rational position, which is, I'm just not going to be a guinea pig. I'll wait for a few years. I have waited a few years, and I realized that it doesn't really work anyway. So my intuitions were right. Yeah, I'm not debating it with people. If you've taken it, khalas, that's your thing.
You're not an empiricist anyway, so
yeah. So for me, it was an intuitive thing as well, which is, and I said, let's wait to see what happens. And because you have to, the problem with this discourse is, which relates to science, is science now today is also related to money. Right?
Absolutely.
There's a lot of money behind it.
Absolutely.
Like, for example, take the environment when they talk about climate change. You spoke about this earlier before the podcast. And climate change is a money business because, you know, they have found hydrogen fuel. It's water.
That's right.
You put water in a car and it works. They've solved the problem, but no one's using it. No one's doing it. Why? Why? It's not giving you any money. So don't say, oh, it's about climate change. It's combined with different other factors, right?
Yes,
and aspects. So we have to also realize that, you know, science, it's not this kind of objective Moses tablets that come down and tell us what to do. There is a ideological paradigm, and we have to be aware of that. And that's why when it comes to the LGBTQ plus stuff, sometimes when scientists develop, you know, they have a conclusion based on peer review journal, they have a study concerning something. For example, they recently found out that, you know, homosexuality is not genetically driven. And they had a communication paragraph at the bottom saying, you know, we have to sensitively communicate with the LGBT community because this may have sensitivities, this, that, and the other, whatever. There are lobby groups that affect, you know, science, and so on and so forth. Now, science is great, we should do it, of course, but don't be naive. And even in the philosophy of science, you have something called theory ladenness, and you alluded to it earlier, where scientists already believe in the theory to be true, but they read the theory into the data. So the point is, when it came to something like this, just practically, intuitively, and rationally, I'm like, it's too fast, it's relatively new technology. And I'm saying to myself, no, thank you. I'll wait a few years, let the guinea pigs do their job. And they have, and the conclusion is, don't need it. Thank you very much.
That's right. That's right. Very well. I remember Novak Djokovic. He didn't take the jab, and he wasn't allowed in the Australian Open. He was the defending champion at that time.
Yeah, he was,
this is how it was compelled so much that he traveled there. He was detained for 10 to 15 days, if I remember, and he wasn't allowed to play there because he wasn't taking the jab.
But then he went back there and won the Grand Slam again.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, but the Australian government at that time was very draconian, I heard, when it came to COVID, and it was crazy. But I heard Australians love a rule anyway. They love a good old rule. But even with the Australians loving a good rule, they don't like breaking rules, they still rebelled a bit. It was too much. It became like a prison. In actual fact, it used to be a prison. maybe it's, you know, generational. But anyway, so for me, it was just rational, intuitive. You know, it's not like, oh, you know, there's what do you call it? There's something malicious behind the whole thing. Although now I'm kind of open to the idea.
Okay.
Because when you retrospectively look back, thinking, this is interesting. This is interesting. Very interesting.
But I can tell you,
Pfizer, for example, bro, sorry to interject. Pfizer, for example, way before COVID, spent billions on this new technology. Now, even from an economic perspective, right? If I spend billions on new technology and I'm not going to be using it, why did I spend billions on the technology? I let you to connect the dots. Just it's all available for you to know.
All I can say is that whether it was engineered, it was man-made, whatever, but damn thing was real. I contracted it. And
me too. I got it 3 times. I got it 3 times.
Inside, yeah.
I got it once in the beginning when it started, I believe. I got it then once during the COVID period. I think it was in August. It was horrendous. It took me about a month to recover properly. And it affected my mental health as well. Yeah. And I got it, a mild version, once in December that's only lasted around 2 days. Because you get stronger as you get
the immunity develops.
Like Adnan Rashid got COVID as well. He got really affected. Yeah, he got really affected. And yeah, I mean, it is. I'm not saying it's not real, by the way.
It was devastating.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was devastating.
No. So I don't want people to think that. I don't think it was definitely real. I'm just saying about, you know, was the vaccine the best solution? That's what I'm saying.
Also coming to now the point which I really wanted to ask you, and especially because you're an expert in it as well, what do you think? And firstly, I will ask a question to you and then to Brother Kaysar. According to you, what argument you think is the most strongest to put forward to a person who digs science, firstly, then a person who is academically very strong in terms of philosophy and theology, in terms of existence of God. Basically, you can answer one by one.
So I'm going to address the main question, or the question that I want to answer, just by virtue of me just having my Greek European privilege here. And then our beloved brother could answer the rest. So if someone argues that science leads to atheism, there's a few questions that they're raising, or there's a few positions that they're holding. And they could hold all of them or at least one of them. So one of them is they believe that the scientific method actually negates the idea of a creator that is transcendent. Now, this is totally false, because when you look at the scientific method, the basic essential elements of what it is, the mathematician and the philosopher of science, Bertrand Russell, said that essentially science is that you have observations and you reason over those observations to either discover facts about the world or laws connecting those facts together. Professor Elliot Sober, the atheist philosopher of science, basically says in his essay Empiricism, at any moment in time, scientists are restricted to the observations they have at hand. So it's observations. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a creator, the essential kind of definition of Al-Khaliq, the creator, is that he is a creator that created the whole universe and he's transcendent, meaning he's not observable.
Yes.
So already you know the answer. How can a method that restricts itself to what's observed deny that which cannot be observed?
Cannot be observed.
And one would argue, well, that means you're proving ghosts could exist then, because science can't go against the idea of the unobserved, and ghosts are unobserved. Therefore, you're saying that ghosts actually exist. No, you've turned the logic on its head. I'm just saying, as a method, it cannot deny what it can't be observed. But just because what can't be observed, just because it can't be observed, it doesn't mean it's true. Yeah, there's a difference there.
That's right.
I'm just saying you can't use the method to deny God's existence.
Yes, right.
Right?
That's right.
And we could prove God's existence for things outside of the scientific method. Contingency argument, argument by design, argument by our rational faculties, and so on and so forth. So an atheist who makes that claim is equivalent of someone going to a palace with 1,000 rooms. And they open room number 1. They're all numbered 1 to 1,000. And in the first room, they see this whole studio. They close the door, then they leave. Then they meet their friend and they say, I went to this palace, had 1,000 rooms. I went to the first room and I saw the studio. And his friend says, okay, what was in the other rooms? He says, nothing.
Okay.
And he says, how do you know? Because I know. Why? Did you go to those rooms? No, I didn't. So how do you know? Because there was something in the first room, there's nothing in the other rooms. Does that logically follow?
Yeah.
No.
Flawed.
Well, that's what an atheist does. We've got this universe that we observe and we could make sense of. Therefore, there's nothing outside of the universe. Insane, dumb logic. Hugh Gauch actually makes this point. He says to insist that science adopts methodological naturalism and that science leads to atheism is to get high marks for enthusiasm and low marks for logic. Another reason they'll make this conflation is because so the other reason they'll feel that the scientific method leads to the denial of God is because they conflate methodological naturalism with ontological and metaphysical naturalism. Metaphysical naturalism is the worldview that there is no God, there is no supernatural, no non-physical, everything can be explained by physical processes in a reductive or non-reductive sense. It's a worldview. Methodological naturalism is not a worldview. It's like a methodological criterion to assess what is scientific and what isn't. And they say for a conclusion to be deemed as scientific, you just can't refer to divine agency, you can't refer to the supernatural. But it doesn't mean God doesn't exist. Even the evolutionary biologist Scott C. Todd makes this very clear. He says the scientist, you know, he's not committed to naturalism, meaning methodological naturalism. He could believe in non-naturalistic things. So, but they make these two things the same. They make methodological naturalism and philosophical or ontological naturalism the same, and they're not. Just because scientists, generally speaking, adopt methodological naturalism, meaning scientific conclusions cannot refer to God's existence or divine agency, it doesn't now mean he doesn't exist. To make that claim, you would have to adopt philosophical naturalism. Yeah, so you're making them the same. So that question's out the window. The other question is, well, maybe science denies revelation, not just God's existence, but revelation of Scripture.
I was going to come to that.
But you have 3 principles which we alluded to earlier with regards to the philosophy of science. Number 1, you have the inference to the best explanation that scientists generally use most of the time. What is the inference to the best explanation? Let me give an example. My 11-year-old son wakes up at 3 in the morning, he goes to the cupboard, he takes the cookie jar, eats all the cookies, goes to the couch, falls asleep, cookie crumbs all over his face, cookie jar on the floor and it's empty. I wake up and I see him doing that. Based on my background information about my child that he loves cookies and is a bit cheeky, based on the fact that I have data that I've observed cookie crumbs, empty cookie jar, I make the conclusion that my son ate the cookies.
Circumstantial evidence.
Is that the best explanation, or is the best explanation my wife ate the cookies? It's my son ate the cookies.
Yes, of course. That's
okay. But if we change the background information and change the data, the explanatory inference changes. How? Say, for example, upon waking up, I find a good doctor's note that says, your son has allergic reaction to cookies. His face will swell up and it will be red for about 12 hours. That's a different background information now.
That's right.
And then I go into his room and I find underneath his pillow with my wife's handwriting says, you know, son, please wake up at 3 a.m. and pretend you had the cookies because I want to have them, but Baba doesn't let me have cookies. And I go to my wife's side of the bed and I see some cookies underneath her pillow. So based on the new background information, based on the new data, what is now the best explanation? My son ate the cookies or my wife?
You've got it.
Thank you. You could always have different background information, new observations, new data that contradicts your current explanation that make you shift to another explanation that best explains the information, the data. And this is very clear. So theories are based on the explanatory inference, generally speaking, and that can change. So if that you should understand. So that means it's probabilistic, it can change. Number 2, although scientific realists were motivated by the fact that workable theories, that science worked, they knew that there was no necessary link between something that worked and it being true. So just because science works, it doesn't mean it's true. That's an important principle to understand. So in the 1700s, we had the theory of phlogiston, and he argued that anything that would burn would release phlogisticated air. And Dan Rutherford in 1772 used that theory to discover nitrogen. But then we find out later that phlogiston was false. So you can have a workable theory that produces truth that you find out that is actually false. In actual fact, Professor Elliot Sober argues that there are false theories that can be more workable than true ones. So just because it works doesn't mean it's true. Finally, the epistemic state of scientific theories. When you look into anti-realism, instrumentalism, and scientific realism, you would see that they all agree that science can change.
That's right.
Like scientific realism argues that a Wolfram theory with predictive power, its predictions are representation of reality. Instrumentalism says that a Wolfram theory with predictive power, its predictions are just workable models. Anti-realism says none of it, it doesn't represent reality at all. They all agree that science can change.
That's right.
So if it's probabilistic, if we know that just because it works, it can't be true, and if we know that it can change in the future, then if it's that friction with revelation, and we know revelation is from Allah, science is from a pixelated human understanding, Allah has the picture, we got the pixel, then generally speaking, you do that epistemic weighing, and you just basically just stick to the Quran. It's part of your aqidah. If there's a workable theory that you know may change based on what we've just discussed, but it's workable, you could still work with it, but just don't put it in your aqidah. Khalas.
That's right. That's right.
Finally, scientists would say, well, there is friction with direct observations in the Quran. Now, direct observations, generally speaking, are science, but they're not scientific theories. Scientific theories, you need more than one observation, you reason over them. Some science is just based on direct observation, like biology. There you go. There's the testes, is right there.
That's right.
Sorry, I'm not trying to be rude.
Yes, I understand.
It's part of the example I'm going to give you,
that's
that's why, yeah?
Okay.
You know, there's the seminal vesicles, there's the kidneys. You have 2 kidneys. I saw two kidneys, therefore he has 2 kidneys. I saw X, therefore X. It's observational. It's not really theoretical. Although there are theories within that too. So they would argue that direct observation goes against revelation. We say, no, it doesn't, because they commit three wrong things. Number 1, they don't know the Quranic Arabic. Number 2, they don't know the science. Or number 3, they don't know the Quranic Arabic or the science.
Or the science.
And this is called the scientific errors narrative. And the scientific errors narrative is what? That direct observation that is well established, that we can't go against, we can't deny, goes against the Quran. And they would argue that it goes against any valid interpretation of the Quran. But we would say it may go against some valid interpretations of a particular verse, but not all of them. As long as one valid interpretation is fine and sound, then your error narrative is false. And there is no instance of any direct observation going against the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me give you a quick case study. Chapter 86, verses 5 to 7. Allah says, and the fluid emerged from between sulb and tara'ib, the backbone and the ribs. And they say, oh my God, what's the detraction? They say, God says in your book that the Quran says that sperm comes between the backbone and the ribs, and it doesn't. It comes from the testes, and it's nowhere near the backbone and the ribs. So they say you're wrong. So here's the first point. First of all, foremost, Allah doesn't mention the word nutfa. Nutfa in Arabic is the most minute, small drop of fluid from a greater quantity of fluid. That is closer to the meaning of sperm. Allah mentions ma'a, which is water, fluid. So Allah's saying the fluid emerges from between the backbone and the ribs. So one, the contention is false. Even if Allah does mention sperm, it's still correct. Why? Because sulb doesn't just mean backbone. In the classical dictionaries, and they should have checked this for themselves, it means loins.
Okay.
And loins is anything you put your underpants on. And that's where your testes are.
Oh, yeah.
Unless you have serious problems. So the point is, so it is true within the ribs and the loins is where the testes are. And that's where the sperm comes from. Khalas. And the sperm travels through the seminal vesicles. Do you see my point? Which is a little bit higher. So it's all aligned with direct observation. That's number one. Number two, let's take Ibn Kathir's interpretation that the fluid comes from between the sulb, backbone, loins, and the ribs. We know that. Fluid comes from the testes, seminal vesicles, prostrate gland. All of those things are within the loins and the ribs. In actual fact, English definition of loins is something below the rib cage and within that area. So it's perfectly fine. Second interpretation, it doesn't refer to the fluid, it refers to the baby. Because you can do that. So grammatically, if you study the verse from a classical Arabic point of view, the normative use would be that it still refers to the fluid. When Allah says yakhruju, it emerges, yeah? What is it? The normative understanding would be the fluid itself. But Allah doesn't always follow that rule, which is allowed in classical Arabic. It could also mean the baby. This is a view that Ibn al-Qurtubi refers to and Ibn Atiyah refers to, classical scholars. And the modern scholar, Professor Abdul Halim, refers to it, and he does an analysis, a thematic analysis of this chapter. That makes sense it's the baby. And the baby is between the loins, backbone, and the ribs.
Absolutely.
Khalas.
Absolutely.
Accurate. Your doctor?
Yeah, absolutely.
Takbir. Yeah, see?
Allahu Akbar.
The other opinion, the other layer.
Yeah.
Maturidi's opinion, an old tafsir. He says this is a kinaya. Sulb is a kinaya. What's a kinaya? Indicator, a linguistic indicator for a man. And he quotes another verse in the Quran that uses the form of that word, which refers to your sons or men.
Okay.
Or boys. So sulb also, the root word, it indicates something to become rigid or hard. Yeah? Men become rigid or hard in the I was going to say in the intellectual discourse.
You can say that.
You can as well. In intercourse, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so in intercourse. So sulb is a kinaya, is an indicator for a man, and tara'ib, rib cage, is an indicator for a woman. And in the married to intercourse, they come together, right? After a valid nikah, of course, and the fluids emerge between them. And this is like a balagha, this is like a rhetorical, polite way of indicating the sexual union. All three layers aligned with direct observation. The detractors didn't know the Quran. They probably didn't even know the science, or they didn't know the Quran or the science, and this was a case study to undermine that. So the three main key questions or postulations or assertions from the atheists that adopt science to attack the Quran, revelation of Allah, all failed. Nare takbir.
I would like to add one thing.
That was just the science. That was just
I
the
would
science.
like you to address 2 points.
Yes.
One, the deistic point, the deistic approach towards understanding God, and then of course the the atheistic point is on side like it's the deistic and Spinozaism, of course, because the people who are the empiricists, who do not dig the idea of a personal God, like the scientists like Bohr and these people. I would like you to address this.
Well, let's start with the empiricists. It's not wrong to be an empiricist, but it is wrong to be only empiricist. That is the problem with, because, this is a well-settled principle in philosophy that if you want to ascertain the truth value of any claim, then the spirit of that claim, you apply that on that very claim, and then you see if that holds merit. So, for example, when we get to an empiricist's claim that all knowledge can be acquired through observation. So now you have two options. The person who is making the claim, either he has all the knowledge or he doesn't. If he does not have all the knowledge and he still believes that it can be acquired empirically, that is not an empirically supported claim. So it just finishes then and there. If he does have all the knowledge, then he's lying because no one does that.
That's right.
So the claim that goes into the very root of the epistemological foundation of empiricism itself negates empiricism, because the moment you say all knowledge can be acquired through observations, well, that is not an empirically supported statement because you don't have all the knowledge. So you're just making that assumption that it can be, right? So that's problem number one. Problem number two with the deism is, look, deism not just philosophical construct, but there's historical evidence that deism is just a pre-stage of atheism. Because people in the West, they were Christians, and the people in the West, they became atheists. It just did not happen overnight. Deism was that connecting bridge in between. Because what deism posits, that progressively, what it does is it blurs the distinction between the immanent and the transcendent. Immanent is anything that we can comprehend through our rational faculties. Transcendent, as the name gives it away, it's something that we can have some idea about. We can get acquainted with it, but we cannot fully comprehend it. And deism posits that the things that you cannot comprehend rationally, well, that doesn't exist. So this is what the Christians of the West, they fell in that trap, and progressively everything mentioned in Bible or the scripture that was transcendent, they started to discard that slowly, because they believed their rational faculties to be the measure of ultimate truth. And that is how they became atheists over a period of time. It's a great dialogue recorded on how that transition happened in the books of philosophy and the history of philosophy. That's why deism itself is a very dangerous position, because it takes you to atheism. And the moment you become atheist, then you have absolutely no explanation for anything. And to me, it's an insult to human intellect that you have existential questions. And in order to find the answers to those questions, you hold another position, in this case, atheistic position, where you end up with more questions than the answers. So deism, it never works. It's sort of a lazy attitude. Because the laziness actually comes from a distinction that normally people don't talk about, and that is the distinction between theology and religion. The simplest way to explain this is that the theology is something to do with our connectivity with God, the nature of belief, and so forth. Religion is more of a culture that every day we practice. For example, eat with your right hand, and then when you knock at the door, you stand on the right side, and so forth. I mean, that is not the concern of theology, that's concern of religion. Exactly. Deists, what they do is they want to have some kind of theological view that, yeah, there is God, someone must be running the entire show, but then he is not your personal God, because he wouldn't really get involved in it. He wouldn't give you a religion. But the problem with that is that if there is a God that is responsible for the entire creation, including your own self, and you are so complex, biologically speaking, so complex, your cardiovascular system and everything else is so complex, then what is more plausible? That he had given you such complexity because there is no purpose and he doesn't want to get involved in your life? Or he had made you, because everything which is created and there is a complexity in the design, it's made to achieve a particular purpose. So you've been given the consciousness, you've been given the perfect body, you've been given all these things, all that because God doesn't want anything to do with you. Well, that's a heck of an non-empirical statement. Because to make it empirical, you will need a different realm, a different universe where you go and you can see there is a God who is capable enough of creating these apparatuses, but then he's just gone away from everything. If you've seen that, then you can say empirically that's observable and maybe that is happening here. But if that doesn't exist, then none of this is philosophically valid.
So that particularly, and Brother Hamza, you would agree to this point, especially because there is one thing which I have noticed, especially working in the academia and here in Pakistan. Many people do hold this. They are on the on the journey. They claim to be on the journey of finding God according to them, and they say the Spinozaistic, the point of view or the deistic point of view might work for them, until they have reached a point that they are now in a position to confirm or affirm the existence of God in themselves. Although the people who are in the journey or in the process, according to them, how would you suggest them to take these two particular notions, which Brother Kassar has also mentioned?
Look, he's going to go, so he's going to agree with me. Trust me.
Yeah, so look, I think because of time, what I would suggest is these people have to read the Quran. All of these answers are answered in the Quran. People don't have a good relationship with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't ponder over the book of Allah, which is very interesting. Allah says, do they not ponder over the Quran, or are there locks on their hearts? So the more pondering you do, the more your heart becomes unlocked to receive His guidance and mercy. All of these philosophical mumbo-jumbo, intellectual gymnastics, it's all part of the inferiority complex, really. Go back to the Quran, ponder over the Quran, look at the relevant verses that address things like deism or why Allah is worthy of worship, who is Allah, purpose of life. You sit there without any intellectual, emotional baggage, and you're sincere, and you do a deep analysis and assessment of these verses, you'll be compelled to adopt the Quranic worldview. And I think that is the starting point. Because Allah has set down guidance for you to be guided. Read the book of Allah. Even if you don't believe in Allah and His book, there is a claim that this is guidance. Read it. Reflect upon it. Be sincere. Don't take intellectual and emotional baggage and impose it onto the Quran. Allow the Quran to speak for itself. And when you do deep reflection, inevitably, you'll be compelled to accept His worldview.
Absolutely. So now we come up to the end of this very productive session, alhamdulillah. And I hope our viewers will not only enjoy, but learn many things from this podcast. And now signing off with this, especially thanking both the worthy guests. Thank you so much for joining us today for the session. And now I am signing off. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.